last guy was super creepy.
Grand Empress Shek'zeer, Empress for short, is the final fight in Heart of Fear, and it's a 3-phase fight where phase 1 and 2 alternate until you hit 30% life on the boss, and then we finish off with phase 3 to end it. Each phase 1 will occur over 2.5 minutes. It's represented by an energy bar that drains off the boss. She stacks Eyes of the Empress on the main tank. At 5 stacks, the main tank will be converted into a mob that technically we can kill, but it's essentially a wipe. So this just means that tanks have to rotate taunt swap once they hit 4 stacks. The boss does an ability called Dread Screech, which is that random raiders get hit by physical damage and any allies within 5 yards of them. So we simply default to a spread position for this phase. But the real mechanic of phase 1 is Dissonance Field and Cry of Terror. That is, 2 dissonance fields will be placed on the ground 30 seconds in, and another 2 will be placed 60 seconds in, roughly in the middle of the map. Each of these fields has its own health pool, except for instead of the health pool going down based on your attack damage, its health goes down based on the number of attacks dealt to it. When a field is destroyed, it does an explosion that significantly damages all the raid, such that if you have more than one explode in quick succession, it's probably a wipe. So what we have to do is strategically attack specific fields so that they die first with enough time such that when the second one explodes and then the third and then the fourth later on a few seconds later, that they give enough room that healers can top people off and survive through these series of explosions. Now, standing inside the bubble itself will allow your attacks to count for a multiplicative amount of attacks on it, thereby increasing the rate at which one specific bubble goes down. However, we can't all just go stack in one bubble and nuke that one down really quick because we have to spread for the other abilities that the boss does. In addition, there's an ability called Cry of Terror where 4 random casters or healers will be applied a debuff, and when that player with the debuff is outside of a dissonance field, they do 2 seconds raid-wide damage ticks. So these players have to immediately go into a dissonance field. When they're in the field, they no longer tick the raid. However, this is complicated by the fact that they themselves continue to tick themselves, and when a player is in a dissonance field, they cannot be healed. So we have to make sure that the Cry of Terror targets are topped off before they enter their field as quickly as possible. It's worth noting that Power World Shield does absorb some of these ticks, and so Disc Priests are very good at keeping these people alive while stacked in the bubble. However, in Heroic mode, there's a special thing that happens. After a few seconds of the dissonance field sets being produced, one of them will randomly be selected to be corrupted, and a corrupted field will do raid-wide shadow damage until it's popped, which means we have to specifically pop the shadow corrupted dissonance field as soon as possible. Therefore, it's very important that nobody go in dissonance fields unless they have Cry of Terror, and the Cry of Terror targets immediately swap to a corrupted one as soon as possible to get that one take more damage than the others. Because we have to wait a few seconds before knowing which one's corrupted, until a corrupted one appears, we have to make sure to equally destroy the existing barriers until we have visual confirmation of which one needs to be the Zerg target, because we have to make sure that we don't accidentally Zerg the wrong one down, leading to 2 popping at the same time and causing a wipe. Our goal for every phase 1 that occurs is to make sure that these fields have been dealt with before either the timer ticks over to phase 2 or we're transitioning into a phase 3. Phase 2 is an add phase. The boss will fully despawn and we get a total of 8 new adds to deal with. 2 of these adds are Reavers and 6 of them are called Wind Blades, and I'll explain what their abilities are in a second. Phase 2 will end when a certain timer is reached and it transitions back into phase 1, or when the adds are finally killed. And if for some reason we have adds up when the timer hits, we've got a lot of problems on our hands and it will probably be a wipe. The first of the adds is called the Wind Blades, and there's going to be 6 of them, so the most of the adds will be Wind Blades. They're tankable, but they will begin to fixate random targets in the raid for 30 seconds at a time. They're slow moving, and I believe they can be slowed. However, it's important to just keep away from them and take no unnecessary damage while you kite. They cast an ability called Dispatch, which is a kickable spell that does high damage to a specific raider, so it must be kicked. and they do a Sonic Blade ability if they ever reach their target. However, the most important ability with the Wind Blades is called Sticky Resin. They'll pick a random location kind of near them, and a little void zone will drop, although it's amber colored. And if touched by a player, it will stick to them as a debuff, ticking some nature damage and slowing them by 30%. However, if the player with this debuff walks into another existing sticky resin, it will drop the debuff off of them and add to that pool. And when 4 individual sticky resins have been collected together, it arms an amber trap. This is useful because it stops an ad from interacting with us while still being attackable and does an increasingly powerful ticking damage to that mob. However, if a Windblade is alive and something is trapped in the amber trap, the Windblade will go over and untrap that mob. And so we can only use these amber traps effectively on Reavers when it's only Reavers left. So each phase 2 will have 2 of these Reavers, and their main ability that's negative to us is called Poison Bomb, which is a 10-second debuff on a random player, which does significant nature damage to that target, but then also random raiders get ticking nature damage every 2 seconds around them. The typical solution is that a defensive is placed upon the raid to reduce the damage during this period of time. However, Reavers actually benefit us because they have an ability called Poison Drenched Armor. They'll debuff on their current target, so our tank, which deals nature damage to that player, but it gives nearby raiders a chance to do additional nature damage with each attack to the mobs around them, and so it increases our ability to kill things that are near the Reavers. Finally, tanks must point the Reavers away from the raid because they do a frontal cone. In addition, Band of Valor means that each member of the Empress Royal Guard, which are the ads that we're killing, inflict 30% more damage for every other member of the Royal Guard within 8 yards of each other. Because of this, the tanks will split the ads up evenly, so there are 2 individual stacks where the current suggested split is 1 Reaver and 3 Windblades per stack. Of course, noting that eventually some of the Windblades will start fixating, which reduces that stack as well. We then Zerg the Windblades as best as we can, get them down, have people create these amber traps in preparation for the Reavers being by themselves, and then once it's just Reavers, the tanks will kite the Reavers to the amber traps, stopping them in their tracks and doing increased damage to them until all the ads are dead. As mentioned earlier, once the ads are dead, it'll transition back to phase 1, and it is worth noting that phase 3 will only ever start exiting a phase 1 because during phase 2 the boss can't be attacked. Phase 3 is back to just the Empress, and we still have to tank swap at the 4th stack because the 5th stack will convert them into a very bad ad. However, the boss's abilities are completely different. The first ability is called Shaw Energy, which does random raid damage on 5 targets at a time. The boss does Consuming Terror, which is a frontal cone in fear. And very importantly, the boss does Visions of Demise, which is every 15 to 20 seconds, 5 raiders will get a debuff. The first 4 seconds of this debuff does nothing, but then it converts into a Dispellable Fear that does significant shadow damage to all players within 8 yards of that feared target. So it's important that all raiders be aware of the debuffs they get. If they get this debuff, they try to avoid as many people as possible in the first few seconds, and then those who can dispel the ability do so as quickly as possible to stop that shadow damage spread. And very unfortunately for our healing core, we have the ability Calamity, which is every 6 to 10 seconds, the boss will remove 50% of all remaining health on the players. So we have another Anub'arak situation. Unfortunately, we can't just let everyone's health drift to 10% and call it a day. We have to continuously top people off because of the other abilities I've already mentioned that occur. Otherwise, everyone will just get hit by Shaw Energy or be feared and do that tick damage thing. It's going to be bad, and that's why this part of the fight is more of a Zerg than anything. In addition, the boss does a ramping damage rot called Amassing Darkness. A random raider will take shadow damage, and it increases the number of affected raiders as time progresses. This is a soft enrage. If that wasn't enough, in Heroic only, there's the Heart of Fear. A little object will appear in the map, and every 10 to 15 seconds, a random raider will be targeted by a beam from this Heart of Fear. This beam must be soaked by another raider, or it will be a certain instant death for this targeted player. And so the strategy is that whatever tank is not currently taking the boss, they intercept the beam as long as it's casting, and then they return back to the boss and swap at the 4th stack. And then that new tank is waiting to intercept the next Heart of Fear beam.